Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first of what I hope will be many roundtable discussions with the instructors from the UW-Whitewater fencing coach camp. My name is Brian Duckwitz, and I'm the camp director. On this first video, our guests are going to be Eric Momberg and Mike Pederson, two of our instructors at the camp. Rose Abelvero and Mike Garrison were not able to join this time, but we're hoping to get them in next time around. We have a lot of great discussions in here about what's important to being a good fencing coach and how you can go about building collaboration and community within your fencers. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone, whoever ends up watching this. This is our first, I'm calling it our roundtable discussion for the instructors at the UW-Whitewater fencing coach camp. I wanted to do this because during the lead up to last year's camp, we had a lot of these meetings because it was the first time you'd all work together as a group. And during those meetings, I'm the camp director, but I don't do the instruction part of it. And so I got to listen to a lot of really interesting discussions with our instructors. And I don't know, I just had this sense that it was really wonderful how on this much on the same page a lot of the ideas were, but there are differences, obviously, and I think it's really valuable for people to hear about that. So maybe a few folks will watch this and get curious about our camp and want to learn more. But I think the main reason is just get these conversations out there. We're moving into, as we mentioned before we started here, moving into an Olympic year, and I know that tends to bring, if other people's clubs are like ours, it tends to bring a whole bunch of new faces in. And so this is a good time for coaches to think about how do we do the best job we can and train our fencers in the most effective way possible and help them be successful. So I think that timing is part of what I'm thinking of as well. We may be joined later by Rose Abelvero, but he's currently not here. But if he is, we'll just have him jump in. But we have with us Mike Pederson and Eric Momberg. I'm not going to go through their extensive and esteemed bios because I'll just put a link to that in the video wherever that ends up. But needless to say, they're excellent coaches and coach educators. So thank you so much, guys, for making time to do this. So I sent an email out with just a really general basic question that we'll kick it off that way, and we'll just see where things go. I don't have any, particular agenda for what we talk about. We'll just see where the conversation leads us. But I asked, what are some of the most important elements of being a good coach? And I should have said a fencing coach, but I guess I assumed that went without saying. I think there are some things that are being a good coach in general, but if we want to tailor it a little more specifically, we can do that as well. So what do you think? Either one of you can jump in and just, go back and forth and talk about it.
Well, I think, first of all, you have to like working with people.
That's true.
Because, and I think that's a very general thing, but you have to enjoy that interchange between student and coach or parent and coach. And I think if you enjoy that part of it, everything else is learnable. So you have to really enjoy people, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that, and this is really hard, you have to listen more than you talk.
Yeah.
Especially when you're working with athletes. Coaches have a tendency to talk a lot. So listen, then talk, is always one of my first pieces of advice. And I think that's what makes, aside from a myriad of other things, but those two jump right out. technique, you can learn.
Right.
Um, Teaching philosophy, how you organize classrooms, you can learn, right? But those little things like learning to work with people, or the soft skills,
Hmm.
that's, I think, the most important thing. And I think it's the thing that isn't emphasized in coaching education.
That's a great point.
The
Yeah.
technical things are emphasized, like how do you do a parry four? How do you do a circle six?
Right.
All that's emphasized, but the soft skills are not. So I think those are the critical skills that make or break a coach.
I like that.
So,
That's yeah. I can I was a classroom teacher for a long time, and I can see how that idea of soft skills makes a lot of sense. And you have to like people and like working. In fencing, it's a one on one a lot of times instead of a team sport, right? So you're working very
mhm,
closely with athletes a lot.
mhm,
Eric, what do you think?
100%.
think I agree with Mike on the you need to enjoy working with people, and I think the thing that will keep you in it the longest in a healthy way, right,
Mm,
is the connection, connection with people, connection with your students, and a desire to help your students achieve their goals. Right, I think there's a finite amount of information in any sport, right? Like if you study anything long enough, right,
Right.
you're gonna see the same themes over and over again. So it's the material that you're presenting, does it changes a little bit, but it doesn't change a ton, right? The change that you're gonna see, and the thing that's going to make your day to day different is the athletes that you're working with, and their what they see in what's happening, right? Because it's not ultimately about what you see, it's about what they see,
mm,
and what they're looking to get out of it. You may have the best concept in the world on paper, but if you have a student who just mentally or physically can't get behind that concept, they're never going to do it. And you're going to make their life miserable and your life miserable moving in that direction. So you really have to listen, as Mike was saying, get to know the student, listen to the student, move with the student, and guide them from where they are, right? Figure out what their strengths are and help them work from their strengths. That's where they're going to learn the fastest. That's where they're going to find the most enjoyment.
Yeah.
I think the challenges come sometimes in that their strengths, may not be your strengths,
right.
Correct.
and
Yeah.
so um, we have to challenge ourselves um, to to go to somebody else's strengths, somebody else's space, and help them with what they want to do from there, rather than constantly steering it back to our strengths, which is more comfortable. But
Right.
unless your student is very, very similar to you, then that's not going to work out very well. So if you're trying to reach a wide range of people, you got to get outside of that comfort zone. So I
Right.
think the thing that I would add is a growth mindset,
Yeah.
and an exploration mindset, right? Is you have to be in it. It's not that you've hit this coaching space and suddenly you're just dispensing knowledge everywhere. It's
Mm.
you're
Right.
developing alongside each student, because you're going to have to get in there and work from their perspective. So your game is going to grow, and you're going to hit hiccups and all the things, right? It's not like you suddenly hit this level of perfection and then from here you start working. It's constant growth.
Right.
Uh,
Right. And I think the other thing is, you you have to remember that every athlete who comes to you does not want to be a national champion.
Right.
And so you have to meet the athlete at the level where they want to perform. And you have to be comfortable with doing that. Um, when you're a club owner, you get all different levels of
Yeah.
athletes. You're not working with just only a national team who's working at the highest levels, and they are performing at the highest levels. So as a club owner, you get athletes who really just love the sport and just want to come in and do it once a week and have a great time. And so you have to be comfortable meeting the athletes at their level and teaching them with the same level of enjoyment and level of enthusiasm and level of commitment that you are really teaching the higher level students, right? Because you're teaching pretty much the same things. You're teaching them the structure of the sport, you're teaching them the skills of the sport, but really what you're teaching them is to make decisions when they're fencing, right? Proper decisions, right? You're teaching them how to plan and decide what they do before they get on the strip, how to observe their opponents. You're teaching them to get feedback from you. And so how you give feedback and how they get the feedback, that give and take between coach and athlete, that's all part of that. And you have to be able to do that at all different levels, youth elite levels, youth just beginning levels, high school elite, high school. So all different levels. So as a coach, you're really a club coach, you're really a jack of all trades when it comes to coaching. You have to have that ability to touch all those people effectively. And that's a difficult task because a 10-year-old doesn't react the same way as a 17-year-old who doesn't react the same way as a 30-year-old. Each one is different. Right. So
piggybacking off that a little bit too, I think that there's two mindsets that I've seen survive a very long time in coaching, right? The people that are just in it until they produce a world champion, right? And the people that are in it for love of connecting with students. And the ones that are setting that goal of producing a world champion, that's a personal goal. So you still have your own personal competitive goals that you've set that you now need someone to achieve for you, right? And so that can become a very, very frustrating path because it's not going to be you standing on the strip in the world championships. It's going to be somebody else. Right. And the search and looking for that one person causes you to miss a whole ton of other people that you're working with. But the drive to get there keeps people in a long time. But those are also people that I think are not as satisfied with their work, tend to be frustrated with, more frustrated with what's happening versus the other engagement of I'm in it for the growth, for the goal that the person in front of me has set, right? Yes. If their goal is lose 10 pounds, all right, let's do it.
That's it. Yeah.
If their goal is get their E this year, okay, let's do it. If their goal is make a world level, okay, World Cup points, okay. But I think it's that meeting that person where their goal is and taking on the challenge of that person, knowing that they're coming with different sets of strengths and weaknesses than you and all of those things, that can be really enriching work. And I think is the people that I've seen that are in it for that reason tend to retain their love of it across more years.
Yeah. Also, I think that brings up a really good distinction. I think there are different types of coaches as well, and different purposes for coaches. Like some coaches are really, really happy and comfortable working at a recreational intro level. And other coaches, like Eric said, are just totally driven to produce a national champion or a world champion or whatever, right? And the methodologies and strategies that those two ends of the spectrum use are actually, I think they can be exactly the same personally, but I think oftentimes they're very different. And I think that it's rare when you get a very high level coach who is a holistic high level coach. And I think that's not as common as it should be. It takes the whole athlete into consideration instead of just driving and forcing the athlete to succeed.
Yeah.
I think it's becoming more common, but I think it's there. I think
That does seem like
rare.
it would be difficult. Yeah. It kind of leads to a
If
question I
when
had about, some, so I'm one of those recreational level coaches, right? But I'm starting to get interested in helping the students who want to. We had, like I mentioned before the call started, we had a few people from our club go to nationals, and trying to support them and help them grow. What are some of the things that you'd recommend for coaches to do to start improving the kinds of skills that they need to be able to help those students to progress?
I think there's a couple of stages, and I see
Sure.
Mike thinking, well, I will buy him some time to concoct a far more intelligent answer than mine. But um, there are different stages in the development of the athlete and the development of the coach. Um, and for all of Mike's pursuit of soft skills, which I think are incredibly important, and yes, are the thing that makes the difference in the long run, there is still a level of, I always use music as an analogy, right? Is you've got to be able to play scales. You've got to be able to read music. You've got to be able to hear which notes are coming out, right? You have to understand keys, right? There is a base body of knowledge that has to happen before the improvisation starts happening, if you want somebody to be able to reach that highest potential, right? And there are always exceptions to the rule, right? BB King couldn't read music, didn't play chords, right? But for the most part, right, we have this basic, we want to get through these ideas of like, can you play scales, can you do these things, right? And there are only 12 notes in music, so it's not a huge body of information, but there's this base level that we want to cover, right? We want to make sure that people can sort of get through these things and understand them, and we teach everybody all of them, right? You don't hold back, you don't edit this out. It's like, okay, here's this base level of knowledge. After that, when somebody, and those things really get us through understanding the sport, having a full set of options available to us, injury prevention, right? Correct movement. We don't want to dwell on those things until they become a job in and of themselves, but they're these basics that we want to come back and touch on. From there, and I think as early as you can within that, that kind of works in concert, right? As you're developing this, like these basic skills, you're also looking for the student's strengths, right? What does the student do well, or the athlete do well? What do they like? What are their tendencies? Is this a more offensively oriented person? Is this a more defensively oriented person? What do they love, right? And trying to engage them from where they are comfortable and what they love, and stretching out a little bit at a time from the strengths, right? Rather than going, oh, and I've seen this a lot, especially in Sabre, right? You have somebody who comes in who's more of a defensively minded personality. You can run a defensive counter offensive game in Sabre very effectively. At the beginning levels, you're going to lose a fair amount. But if that kid is learning that way, and that's the way that they want to fence, and that's where they're getting the most growth and enjoyment out of what they're doing, forcing them into an offensive paradigm that looks more normal is going to make them uncomfortable faster, usually results in them quitting rather than them becoming a better fencer, right? So trying to figure out what are their strengths. Can we teach from their strengths? Can we adapt the game from the strengths until they've checked off all these basic boxes? And then from there, you kind of start tailoring the game towards that personality. What would you add or subtract from that, Mike?
Okay. So to me, I think that's really accurate in many ways. My list is the following. You need technical sport knowledge. You need teaching skills. You need socio-emotional personal skills. You need physiological knowledge. You need the ability to reflect. Really important. You need to understand how to build culture within your club or group or whatever it is. You need to be able to give feedback really well. And you need a mentor. If you're going to grow as a coach, those are really the buckets that you need to fill, I think. I may be missing a few.
You have yes, you said socio-emotional knowledge, like
yeah,
sports psych knowledge,
yeah,
as just
yeah.
emotional development. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you covered. I think you're good.
Because it's coaching is really teaching. All right. It really is. And I really like this guy, Doug Limov. He's a teacher, but he wrote this great book. I will do a plug for it. I don't get paid for this. It's right here. Hope you can't see it. It's called The Coach's. Oh, my background died. Anyway, it's The Coach's Guide to Teaching.
Coach's Guide to Teaching.
By Doug Limov. He's really smart about it. And he's really, he's an educator by trade, but he's an amateur parent soccer coach. And so he got asked by USA Soccer to come in and start talking to their coaches about coaching. And he didn't really think about it really a lot, but as he started to think about the crossovers between teaching and coaching, there's a lot of it. Because what do we do as coaches? We give instruction, we give feedback, we communicate with our athletes, we do everything on that list. And that's really what teachers do, right? That the art of teaching is to communicate information to their students, to give feedback, to ask questions, to get the students to figure things out, right? To draw information out of the students so that they come to the ideas and understand them. So in fencing, in sport coaching, that's what we need to do. So I'm a big proponent of teaching skills, and I think the more that a coach can be a good teacher, the more effective they are as a coach. Not all the time. There are coaches who may not be good teachers who are quite effective. There's always the brute methodology.
Right.
Repetition works sometimes, but I do think having the ability to teach, understanding the socio-emotional aspect, the technical sport, and reflecting is really important. And I also think that last one, the mentor, is so important. Being able to go to somebody who has more experience than you and ask questions and talk to them is critical. I mean, for myself, it was absolutely critical, right? I mean, without Bucky, there's no way that I would have learned as much as I did over time, because Bucky and I talked a lot about fencing all the time. So having that mentorship aspect built into coaching education is, I think, really important as well. So there you go.
Yeah.
I think there's a big, I not to draw a direct dichotomy. I would say there are a lot of ways to be effective. If
Sure.
if effective is producing result,
Correct.
right? So
that is true.
If we look at producing result as a coach, there are more than one way to be effective.
Correct.
I would argue some of those ways are not particularly healthy for you as a coach or for the athletes who are going through it.
Right.
But
we haven't.
It is effective. It will, in fact, yield medals, right? So there are a lot of effective ways to go about it. And I think the answers that you're going to get from Mike and I are leaning towards the effective, but also holistically healthy, right? The goal is produce medals. Always, right? Like for the people who are trying to win championships and produce
Right.
medals, by all means, that's what we're here.
That's the goal.
I love winning, right? That's great. But coming out of that as a healthy coach who still enjoys what you're doing, right? And producing healthy athletes who still enjoy what they're doing. And I think that if you look at certain ways, right, there are ways that are effective and produce high level result. What do the people who didn't make the high level result look like that came out of that system? Do they still love the sport? Are they still
Right.
around? Are they, what's their health? What's their, right? Versus if we go into a holistic system where we're engaging everybody in the club, it takes a little bit more time, right? You can't have quite the ratio, the numbers, and there may be ways to make that effective too. But you've got people at all levels in the club, staying in the club, enjoying what they're doing, not broken, and the coaches still like coming to work, right? That's the end. That's what we're looking for in our coach development. Ultimately, right? If you have that going on en masse, the sport is growing, right? Where if you have the other methods going on en masse, it's staying static or diminishing.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know the numbers, but I know I've heard that, a very large percentage of people who fence in high school just stop after high school because they're burned out for whatever reason, the program they're in. And that maybe a lot of high schoolers like just stop doing things that they did in high school, but I think that feeds into it certainly.
We have an incredibly high attrition rate between women's high school athletes and women's athletes across all sports, not just in fencing. The attrition rate between high school athletes and college athletes in women's sports specifically is considerably higher than it is in men's. And the last number I heard, which is probably about a decade old, was something like 80%.
Wow. Yeah. And so the approach that the two of you are taking, and we saw this at the camp, right, is working on helping coaches to build connection, to look at the whole person, to it always seems to me like your partners at some point, maybe not at the very beginning when people are learning the bare basics, but certainly when we're talking about doing competition and so forth. You've both mentioned what are the strengths of this person and what do they like to do and what are they looking for and all that. I guess that for me that brings up this question about, you talked about building connection with your fencers. What are some of the things that you guys do in your own coaching that maybe you see other people do or maybe you don't, but that you feel helps build those kinds of connections with them as a training partner or as a teacher?
I set a goal to, and I actually keep track of, have I checked in with everyone on my team at least a week. Wow. And that doesn't have to be fencing, right?
Sure.
And often, but simply as much as good morning or how was your day?
Right.
If they had a big test last week, hey, how did that test go?
Right.
But I try to make sure that I ask at least one personal check-in question of everyone on my team every week, and that's my bare minimum. I try to do more, and try to get a touch point with everybody. Eye contact, something, being near there about something with everybody on the team every practice if possible. Now it's harder when you're with an NCAA team if it's big. That can be a little harder, but making sure that I get that verbal, asking them a question about them every week, get through everybody on the team.
Right.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's being deliberate about contacting your athletes on a regular basis is really what it's all about. And it can be like in a club setting, there are opportunities for you to have contact time for, let's say you have a class of 10 and 12-year-olds, right?
Right.
When do you have contact time with them, right? But you check in with them informally, but there are opportunities at a club setting, just like there are opportunities at a national level on a national team or at a NCAA team, right? So like, everybody comes out on the floor, you do your warm up, your activation, maybe do a little footwork or whatever, and then they have to go get dressed. Man, when they're getting suited up, because we got rid of our locker rooms, they're all out in the open, right? That's perfect. Go around, talk to like as many of them as you can. 15 seconds there, 15 seconds there. That this kid is working on a project in science. This kid's doing that. You have to have that. You know your athletes, your membership, and you just have that contact time, and they appreciate it. And then you do the same thing with parents, because parents are a really big part of your club.
Sure.
And you have to have contact times. And when you have more than one fencing coach available, then you split that job, right? One fencing coach deals with the parents, the other person deals with the athletes on the floor, and sometimes you switch that job, right? And so you always have contact time, and then you have your coaches meetings, and you start switching information with each other and talking to them, and like, oh, well, I found out this, I found out that. Hey, you got to watch out, this kid, he's having a hard time at school, blah blah blah. So you work with your team and share that information. And when the same thing happens really at a national team, right? It's smaller, but everybody checks in with all the athletes, and we have staff meetings, and we're talking about athletes. Like, what'd you do?
Yeah.
What one athlete tells a coach is going to be different than what one athlete tells the physiotherapist or the strength and conditioning coach, right?
That's a great point.
And so when we have staff meetings, we talk and we put the holistic picture together. And so it's really important that as a staff, we take the time to do that, because if we don't, then we don't have the pulse of the team. We don't know how the team is actually feeling. And then we don't know whether we need to jump in or stay away or help or whatever, right? Because we're trying to build the best culture that we can all the time, because the high performance culture is a very finicky beast. It can be put off by one thing. One small thing can just take it down. So you're always on top of it. You're always working for it. And the same thing at a club. Your club culture is so important that the more time you spend managing it and what's the right word? I guess helping it grow, the better your club is going to be. Yeah, cultivating. I like that word. Cultivating it. The better off you're going to be.
Sure.
Your club is going to thrive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Okay, we have a little bit different model, right? Because depending on how many staff you're working with or whatever, there's different levels of things, right? So we have a leadership council on the team at Lawrence, and we meet weekly, and they're short meetings. And I try not to waste anybody's time, right? But we meet weekly for 30 minutes. And my first question is always, how are your first years? All right. That's the first, like, tell me how your first years. How is the newest members of your group? How are they getting along? And then my second question is, how do we feel about practice? Right? Are we loving practice? Are we hating practice? Right? Do we like the drills? Do we hate the drills? One of the ones I come at them with constantly is, what do you need more of? What do you need less of? Right. And just getting that from 6 people on the team, giving them that freedom to say things. And sometimes, I'll seed it if I know that people really don't like something that's going on. I'll go, everybody hates the footwork this week. right? So that they don't have to say it to me. It's like, I know everybody hates the footwork. Like, why? What are we hating?
Mm-hmm.
What are we
Right.
hating footwork? Tell me more about what's going on, right? So that you can kind of get that read. And then I think you have to not assume that people are going to just come talk to you.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you can say, right, as I say to my athletes all the time, my office door is literally almost always closed, figuratively always open. Right? So you can say it, you can invite them by, but it's not necessarily going to happen on its own. So providing different structures and different people, right? Like Mike was saying, what people say to the physical therapist is different than what they say to the coaches.
Yeah.
So having either, leadership group or, having been both a head coach and an assistant coach, the things that the assistant coach hears are not the same things that the head coach hears.
Correct.
And so providing different tiers that they can connect with, and knowing that people in those tiers will connect with you if there is something that you need to know to get somebody help. But then also I schedule meetings. I schedule goals meetings with every athlete every fall. And I schedule check-in meetings when the season is over. So we do a goals meeting preseason and we do a check-in meeting postseason. And part of that is so that I am aware of their goals, right? Because it's very hard for me to support them if I don't know what they want. And I may come out and start pushing somebody really hard that doesn't want to be pushed that hard, right? So having a matchup of, okay, what are we doing? But it's also at least twice every year you're going to set foot in my office, right? Just so that, and I'm going to make it as painless as possible. The meetings are short, right? But that way you've got a reason to come. And I'm not just assuming that you're coming. And that makes some people more comfortable with coming back. I had another coach ask in a different sport, and they came to me and they said how they're trying to rebuild the culture of a group. And they said, what is your indicator? Like, how do you know when, if you're working with a new group, a new college group, how do you know when you're reaching an athlete? And I said, the first time they come by my office for something that's not offensive.
Yeah. It makes me think of when I was a college student, that I wasn't until I think third or fourth year in college that I finally just went, like you're talking about, went to visit a professor, not for a scheduled thing, but just to chat, and suddenly realized, first of all, oh, it's a real person. And secondly, just having a lot of really great conversations about all kinds of things. Right. And so, one thing I do in my teaching is schedule, like you said, schedule some of those appointments, and try to meet one-on-one with everyone and give them a chance to see, where your office is, and just ask questions that they might be afraid to ask in a group setting. Or, if you make it a rule like that, it kind of gets the folks who are a little shy and unsure, and are like me, where they don't want to bother someone,
Right.
So yeah, I like that a lot, Eric.
Right.
I'm hearing a lot of comments you're both making about how deliberate you're being with the work you're doing, not just, and now we're not even talking about doing a fencing lesson. We're talking about a lot of other things, but you're being very deliberate about the choices of keeping in touch and building connection. And also, like Mike, like you said, being very reflective as well, where both of you have said things to that effect, where you're talking about how, well, why is it that everyone hates footwork this week, right? Or why is it that everyone's tense seems more tense than usual? And what have I done myself that may be contributing, or is it something not having anything to do with me? What could I do better? Those are really, really, really important kind of life skills too, right? Like not just fencing coaching, but really important.
Right.
Well, I know I said we'd go until about 8:00, so we're there. Unless you wanted to add anything else, if either of you wanted to, go on a tear about something.
I think the only thing that popped into my mind was
Hmm.
this thing that I've been talking with some other coaches about recently is ultimately, right, um we want to be a resource, right? The first
Mm,
person who I heard introduce themselves as a resource was Luther Clement when I was working with him. And he just said, I'm here as a resource if you need me, right?
Right.
And this got me thinking about, especially as in my current role where I am managing um, you know, all three weapons, both genders. And I do, I have a part-time assistant coach, I have a volunteer coach. But a lot of the setting up of everything that's going on, it has to be me looking at essentially six weapons, right?
yeah.
And when I started sitting down and looking at, okay, how do I do this? The answer is I don't, right? Like you can't be in enough places to do that, which got me thinking about sort of this goal in my coaching of trying to build in my own obsolescence, right?
Mm,
I'm I'm trying to create a culture that supports itself and create drill structures, create knowledge, create empowerment in my athletes
mm,
so that they can support each other and support themselves. Because ultimately, at any given point, somebody may be in the most critical bout of their NCAA career, and I might be two strips away coaching somebody else.
right.
So to think that I am going to be a part somehow of this moment, right? And I'm going to be there for every moment, and I'm going to be like, this is half me. No, it's them, right? It's them and their fencing journey. And so I think that part of being a coach is looking at how do we structure things so that our athletes are standing on their own 2 feet,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
and working without us, and then functioning in squads together, right?
Yeah.
What is how does men's foil function as one unit, right? So I look at my whole men's team or my whole women's team as one organism. So I have the men's and women's team together is one culture. The
Mhm.
men's team by itself is one culture. The women's team by itself is one culture. Women's saber and women's epee are two different cultures. So I'm trying to nurture all of those cultures independently and help them fit into each other to make one cohesive whole. But the last thing that I want to be the most important piece in that is myself, right? Because I can't be there enough for everyone. I want them to see
Right.
themselves and the idea of team as the most important thing.
I saw that when I was refereeing at the event at Lawrence, where one of the fencers, I don't know who it was, one of your fencers was just kind of visiting with someone from another school. They must have been friends or something like that, right? And you came over and said to your fencer, "Hey, you've got teammates over there who are fencing. You should be over there cheering them on, right?" And you can I can see that's part of this building, like telling them that this is important. It's important for you to be supporting each other. It's important for you to be working together as a team. It might be one of you on a strip at a time, of course, but that support network isn't just me. It's not just my job as a coach. It's the team has to be able to help itself too. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think that's it goes back to the center of what culture you are building,
sure.
because culture is the driving force behind a club, an NCAA program, a national team program, or anything. The culture and the expectations of that culture that are put in place through the structure that is being developed by the athletes and coaches and promoted by the athletes and coaches, because it has to be kind of a, a combined effort, right?
Right.
There's input on both sides. Um, is, I think, really critical. And oftentimes when you see programs in trouble or you see clubs in trouble, I would say 8 times out of 10, it's related to culture.
Sure.
I really would. because culture just will if you don't have a cohesive culture or a cohesive vision, everything falls apart.
Yeah.
And so it's the single most important thing, I think, as a club owner or as a NCAA head coach or as a national team coach. What you're trying to work on is building that culture of excellence. That's really what you're doing, and how you do it can differ dramatically from club to team to whatever. But that culture of excellence is really what you're trying to build. So I'm going to share in chat a little diagram
Okay.
that I just shared with you all, and it's from somewhere in Canada. But it's a really good little diagram that talks about four different types of cultures: culture of harassment, culture of apathy, culture of inclusion, and a culture of excellence. Right? And what we want to be is a culture of excellence, where the sustained high performance and personal thriving, right? So we have high performance and we have people in it thriving. But we could be one of the other three, and there are all different there are all different examples of all three, all throughout sport.
Sure.
So it's just a good way of looking at culture, I think.
That's great. I'll make sure to share that with the put it in the notes for the recording.
Yeah. So there
awesome. I think if we do another one of these sometime, I think an entire discussion about culture would be really valuable. I know, Mike, you did a talk about that at our camp in 22, and people really loved that. So I think having a discussion of culture would be really awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy, and although maybe not as busy with the end of the season now, but there's always something on the way, right?
I think I'm busier. I'm busier now.
Are you busier now? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely appreciate making the time, and we will talk to you later.